Hello and welcome to Lettres d'Amérique, a virtual series featuring essential American literary voices. I'm Alice McCrum, Programs Manager at the American Library in Paris. Bonjour et bienvenue à Lettres d'Amérique, une série virtuelle avec les nouvelles voix de la littérature américaine. Je suis Alice McCrum, responsable des programmes à la Bibliothèque américaine de Paris. Tonight, I have the absolute pleasure of hosting Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah in conversation with Kierstan Kaushal-Carter to discuss Adjei-Brenyah's short story collection, Friday Black. So now I'll introduce Kierstan and Nana, and then they will begin their conversation. Having received an MA in government from Harvard University and a BA in English and American Culture Studies from Washington University in St. Louis, Kaushal-Carter is now a fourth-year doctoral student in African and African American Studies at Harvard University, where she is writing about policing in the 21st century. Her published writing can be found in the St. Louis Anthology and the New Republic magazine. Kierstan will be in conversation with Nana, who was born and grew up in New York. He graduated from SUNY Albany and received his MFA from Syracuse University. His work has appeared or will soon appear in numerous publications, including the New York Times Book Review, Esquire, Literary Hub, and the Paris Review. Friday Black was published by Mariner Books in 2018. So now over to Kierstan and Nana. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us this evening at Lettres d'Amérique. We're so delighted to host you and have you.
Thank you so much, Alice, for that introduction. And Nana, thank you for this like beautiful collection, and to the American Library in Paris for this space.
Thank you.
So I'm super excited to talk about this book. We were just talking in the virtual green room a couple of minutes ago, and I was saying that this is my second time having read through the collection, and I was saying
I'm sorry about that.
Yes, if you haven't read, if you're just tuning in because out of interest, or maybe you saw some of the other sessions, I would absolutely recommend reading through this collection. But I guess the opening question that I have for you is why these stories together? So maybe beyond the logistical reasons that they were the ones you just felt were the most done when it was time to submit drafts, how do you think these stories hang together?
Well, first off, thank you so much for the kind and generous reads. And thank you to the American Library in Paris. Thanks everyone for taking the time today. But it's a really important question. And it's something I ask sort of every time I am in the process of putting like sort of words on a page at all. And I don't unfortunately have too much choice, but to me, it's like what feels both entertaining and like what has to be said. Even in when I think about the order of the stories, there's a chance that someone could read that first story and be like, you know what, screw this guy and throw the whole book in the garbage, you know? But I kind of I had an idea that, you know what, if that happens, at least I got them that one time. At least I said something really important. That first story happens to be very concerned with the extrajudicial murdering of Black Americans, Black people in America. And so I was concerned about that. I wanted that to be said. So those stories are like a collection of who I am as both a person and as an artist. They're sort of diverse in their delivery and their styles. And I think that's something that's really important to me as an artist, that I had to sort of come into and learn to accept that I have more than one like writerly voice. And I resisted that for a long time, and I had to lean into that. And so I think this first book of mine is a collection that represents accepting that sort of internal diversity of being, and is also really concerned with the world as I see it.
That's really interesting. So you actually wrote a piece, I think in the Paris Review, right after this collection was published, titled like "Why Write Political Stories?" And in it you say that you write political stories because it's what comes out when you write. And I hear resonances of that in your answer, right? That it's about putting yourself as a person and as an artist on the page when you're writing. And so I'm curious, like, what parts of this collection could you have not helped but have written? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I hope every one of them, you know, I hope every story, like it, I mean, I had to fight for some of them too. So like, if I think about a story like The Hospital Where, that one was like, my editor initially was like, if we cut one, we should cut this one. And I felt like a part of me was like, I can't cut that, because that's like even though it's surreal and there's like spirits that represent muses or whatever, it felt like my actual life story. Like that one is like the memoir of the book, that alongside.
Do you feel as though you have a 12-tongue God?
I feel like I have a compulsion to do the writing thing for sure, or else I would definitely do something different. But that said, I love it. It's like this love-hate relationship that, writers talk about often, but I do feel sort of like it's what I have to do, but also what I'm meant to do, and also part of my purpose. And so I've leaned into it and enjoy it. But the Finkelstein Five, I was in college when Trayvon was murdered, when Trayvon Martin was murdered, which was sort of the birth of, I guess, the current iteration of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it changed something in me, something in me changed. And I knew that sort of my first words as an introduction to the world as an artist would have to talk about that change.
Yeah, that piece really resonated with me in part because I lived in St. Louis and about 3 miles from where Darren Wilson killed Michael Brown.
Wow.
And so similarly had this experience of like,
wow,
an event that is obviously very public and part of the zeitgeist just like really turns your world on its axis.
Yep.
Yeah, I actually had a question specifically about Finkelstein Five. I think it is a beautifully written and like classically constructed short story in that it has a surprising turn in the middle and almost in the Chekhov's gun, like the piece that was at the very beginning. I don't want to give it away for anybody because it is a delightful ride. But yeah. I'm curious about the main character, Emmanuel. So in his classic essay, How Bigger Was Born, Richard Wright, who is the author of Native Son, reflects that there were many bigger Thomases in his life. And he says that if he had only known one bigger, he would not have written Native Son. And so my question for you is, how was Emmanuel born?
It's such a smart question. I think that, like I said, so I remember like the moment Trayvon Martin was murdered, and I remember, or the moment I discovered it, and I remember even more so, I remember the moment we discovered that his murderer was going to be acquitted. And that feeling really like sort of was in my bones for a long time. And so much so that in college, me and some of my friends, or actually a friend of mine, created these pamphlets that we anonymously distributed all over the campus. And it was kind of like me on this high horse of like, this is what you need to do, and this is how we change the world. And I went to bed at like 4 a.m. thinking I did such a great job, and kind of like, good job. Well, we ended racism today. And I went to bed feeling very self-righteous and good about myself.
Yep.
I woke up to, the next morning, and like to my dismay, racism had not ended, surprisingly. And
always good to try though. Always good to try. You never know.
And I realized I didn't like that feeling of like, I saw like, janitors, we basically had just littered. I'd seen janitors throw those papers into the trash. And I think somewhere in that moment, like that person inside me, like who was like very, very, very frustrated, like violently frustrated, was realizing that I didn't have the power to adequately express my frustration and anger and sadness and grief. And I would say somewhere there, probably in that moment, as I'm watching a janitor throwing the thing we had worked on into the garbage. But as I grew as a writer, I realized like, I'm glad, I know why that didn't catch on, because I was like on this hill telling people what to do and trying to give them answers, as opposed to what I think I do now, which is ask high level questions and hope that we can come together in sort of like communal space of understanding, or at least the striving for something like understanding or connection or whatever. And so, but yeah, I think Emmanuel was born of that, like a lot of confusion, anger, frustration, sadness, grief that I felt as I was kind of coming to awareness.
Is there something you think that the Finkelstein Five does well as a story, as a text in the world, that you really think of as like corrective of that first attempt of expressing kind of the same feeling?
Yeah. It comes down, I mean, spoiler alert, I guess. Well, first off, like, you know what I mean? Like it will connect with people because it's engaging with the more like, I don't know, base ways that people are engaged. There's like, it has humor. It's not humorless. There's danger. There's real present danger. I think it's easy to be located in that story, but I think for me, the heart of it is that I'm not saying do X, Y, and Z and you'll be fixed. The story kind of boils down to like, I don't know what to do. The main character saying, I don't know what to do, you know? But I know like basically, but also like, and I guess the subtext is, but it can't be this, you know? Not this meaning what he's doing at that moment, this meaning this whole thing. I don't know what to do. And to me, that feels like an evolution in terms of like an approach to complicated problems, because, you know, I don't think any one person gonna come and say like, this is the whole thing. I think it was me just saying like, this is really hard. And I wasn't able to say that before. I think it was more like, my anger was making me try to like rush to some easy answer, but I've come to know that there is no easy answer, and that but we can like work to see like how we can improve. So I think something about that feels like an evolution for me.
Okay, I'm really, I want to dwell in this
Yeah.
I think feeling that is pervasive throughout a lot of these stories. This I don't know what to do. I think one of the things that is so striking for me about the collection, and the thing that originally kind of encouraged me to recommend it to people, is that I think it was one of the first books that I'd read in a long time that was emotionally arresting. So I don't think I have a more polite way to phrase this question, but like I'm curious about what it was like to write men with rich emotional worlds, you know. And here I'm thinking about like Lark Street, the lion and the spider. Like these are deeply complicated characters who are, you know, navigating ambivalence, but doing so in a way that comes out as something other than just anger, which I think is a lot of times the idioms through which men are allowed to express their feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anger is like the default men world way to show something. I think, and it's, again, I think it's a really important question, because you are sort of taught to like, you know, in terms of like what you filter out, anger gets a pass, but almost everything else is like, shut that shit down, you know? And that obviously is a huge, ridiculous problem in our world. And in some of the stories you mentioned, and kind of in all of them, I hope, I wanted to like be really honest with myself about what is felt. And of course, anger is always there, and that's something to honor. But there's also that for me, that's this anger is like almost a surface level thing. You're lashing out because there's a hopelessness, usually a baseline fear, a deep sadness or regret. And so for me, like that's sort of what I felt like I had to really honor those feelings in myself, and then it sort of came through in my characters. So there is like, of course, there's, you know, allowing myself the time and space to feel what I had to feel and get past the sort of default men world sort of attitude of like, I feel nothing, and also like, or like, I'm gonna lash out in anger. It just felt like a more honest place to sort of, for my characters to inhabit.
Is there any story in the collection that you feel like when you read it sometimes that it's too honest? Do you know what I mean? Like that it's like a little bit too sharp, or is the sharpness something you're trying to cultivate?
That's another really smart question. It depends. Like if you're asking like the artist or the person, you know what I'm saying? Like if I'm thinking myself as an artist, never. You never, you know, you only want that as far as you can. As a person, for sure. And not in ways that might always be easy to detect. And it's also like you grow, you know, it was too sharp then, but now I'm okay, I'm better. But there's like stories like things my mother said, which to someone else might, I don't know, feel like that's sad, but whatever. For me, it was way too sharp at the time, you know, and I had to like chill on reading it for a while. It's a story about my own mother and just basically real things that happened. And I found it like really rough to like go into that emotional space to read it even. And I don't like I'm not like reading my own book just for fun. This is for events I'm talking about. I haven't read my book like through ever since I've finished editing it. And I probably won't for another several years. But to me, I think that feeling actually of like it being too sharp or like being too harsh or is actually like, and I haven't thought of it exactly this way, but that's part of what I feel like I have to be doing for the story to be worth writing, actually. So it's a tension always. It has to be a little difficult. The way one of my mentors, Arthur Flowers, would say is like, it has to cost you something. You know, writing at a high level, doing art at a high level, it's going to cost you something. And sometimes it's getting pricked by those sharp edges you're talking about, those sharp sort of sections.
Absolutely. I in your answer, you mentioned things my mother said, and I had it circled because it's a page and a half, and it is just it is again beautiful, devastating, sharp. But I'm curious because there are other pieces in this that are a lot lighter. So How to Sell a Jacket is Told by Ice King strikes me as one of them. Like I think a lot of the Ice King stories are in that register where there's a darker kind of undertone to them, but they also the characters also relaying the stories in a very light way. And so I'm curious how you choose what kind of voice to give to each story. You know, you talked at the beginning about kind of multiplicity within your own writing style. And I'm curious about how you choose between them.
It's a really big question because that is like, it's everything for me. Like, it's almost like happens in the reverse way. Like the voice decides the story, I guess is what I'm saying for me. So I'll have an idea and I won't feel comfortable going into it until I sort of hear the voice of it or hear like the sort of resonances or the way that person would speak. So with the mall stories, the Ice King stories, those stories are of a person who's like not quite ready to deal with his own, like he's kind of in that like tough guy space. You know what I mean? And so he's like a sort of tough guy, kind of cynical. It's kind of funny. And so like he won't quite go all the way to where like some of these other narrators might go. But I think the thing that is there's a certain sadness in that too. There's a certain like sort of felt sadness in like this person's inability to like say like, I'm really hurt by this, or this is really difficult for me, or I really don't want to be here. They rather just gesture towards those feelings and they don't even have the capacity to say it. And that creates its own sort of emotional resonances. Things my mother said was me, with the help of some of my mentors, again, being really, really honest and trying to like go into myself, honestly. Like that story is like, it's like an interlude. I think of it like an album or a mixtape. That's like an interlude where I'm like, here's Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah for a second, like really me, like unadorned, even though to get that to the unadorned feeling is a ton of artifice and hundreds of drafts. But it felt like this is what it feels. This feels like I'm translating my essential, quote unquote, real self, or the lived life of Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah in a way that feels really true. And so at where I was at that point, to do that a couple of years back would have been more Ice King-ish. So again, you're always playing that game of where are you at? Where are you writing? Which is why I always try to create some distance between like a sort of feeling or event and when I try to engage it in writing myself. But I think some stories, it's almost like that resistance to the emotion is like a big part of it. Same thing with The Era, for example. That's like a more surreal and exaggerated version of a place where I feel like many, like I know I was, but many people are, where you're forced to feel like you have to present as okay or happy or whatever, when really you're like struggling. And so I knew that feeling as well. And so finding an interesting way, for me at least, to present that is always kind of the game of how to get into a story.
So I'm super interested in this. Okay, so partly because I wonder if there I know as a reader,
Yeah.
there were certain narrators, certain voices that I was like, not my favorite. You know, like I feel like if I met you at a party, we
Yeah,
would not hang out. And I
for
wonder
sure.
if you, do you have that experience of writing? Are there times you're trying to cultivate that, like a kind of person? And here I'm thinking about, I believe it's Lark Street,
Yeah,
you know, where you're like, I can tell you are struggling with something and it's incredible to move through. And if we were like stuck in a room together, I don't know that we would get along. Do
for
you have that?
sure.
Yeah.
I think that story more than any of the others, actually. Well, I think a lot of the characters can be like semi-unlikable, especially where you're meeting them at. But I think the process of revising that story in particular, Lark Street, was sort of like realizing, oh, like this guy is really self-centered. This guy is really focusing himself in a thing that is not about him, actually, you know, or not
Mm,
only about him. And which is a situation that many men put themselves into, where the story has to do with abortion, and like I think it's easy for men to sort of make themselves feel like the star of that of a show that they are really supposed to be supporting in. And it was like, you know, it was interesting to even write it because I think men too often dominate that conversation in general. But the important for me, there was important things to talk about was to like make sure that, you know, there's a certain violence and taboo. And I kind of want to like push back against that taboo and sort of allow like space for like talking about this thing that is a part of our lives and should be a part of our lives and should be like, you know, readily available in like my opinion. But, you know, there's this guy who's dealing with it in this like kind of like, I'm trying to think of it like a smarter than dickhead way of way. He's in like kind of like a assholish type way, but he gets kind of called on it. And he doesn't really exactly get it. But at least I hope that like in the process of reading it, like sort of people will feel like, oh, like this guy who I'm with is like not where he needs to be. And I feel like the Jacqueline character sort of like says like, bro, you're not really I see someone say problematic again. That's a better way of saying it. You know, that's another way of thinking about that. Like, and the characters themselves, I like dealing with characters who are not great, I guess.
Okay, that is a perfect. Okay, so I have a question about genre that I want to get to eventually, but you've just given me the perfect intro
I'm
to.
handing out a bunch of artful segues, you know.
I so appreciate it. You're making my job super easy. So okay, so on the topic of characters that are struggling through something, I was really curious about the emotional tone of Zimmerland. So for folks who maybe haven't gotten through much of the collection yet, Zimmerland is about, I would say, like making entertainment value out of extrajudicial racial violence. But I think the thing that's striking about it is the like deep ambivalence of the characters in it, especially the characters of color. So Isaiah, Melanie, Soleil, who you might expect to mount a really vigorous objection to the existence of a place like Zimmerland. But they don't, and I think that's the honest choice as a writer. But I would love to hear you talk about the choice to make them complicit and ambivalent, like literally of two minds, about a place like Zimmerland.
So, you know, it's like I think about this a lot because like a story needs like its tension, right? And there's like a couple of places where you can get it. And this is like something I've been thinking about with a story that like I'm working on now. And I sent it to one of my mentors, George Saunders, to read it. And he gave me really good feedback. And it ended up amounting to in that story that doesn't exist like for anyone out in the world yet, like the character, the reader, and sort of the world of the story are all on the same side. And if that's the case in a story, it's almost like, okay, so what now? Right? So in Zimmerland, for example, the protagonist and the reader, most of my readership, I assume, and even me, because in that case, already don't really vibe. We're already like, you're doing the wrong thing. So that's already point of tension, which creates energy for a story. And then like to me, like the better tension is when that's sort of formed of like, like you're not a complete, I'm not dismissing you as a outright, but I think you're wrong, right? So that means it's that's push or pull. Because if it's dismissal outright, if you imagine like a tug of war, that's someone just pulling all the way. I can't even engage with you, like screw you, whatever, boom. But if not, so if you have like that push and pull, now that's some kind of, that's like energy you can work with. So in that story, we have a character who's choosing to work in that space. And for me, as I was like drafting it, I had to think about, first off, I needed someone in the space, right? So that's like out of that logistical necessity became like a story point. Why you work? Why do you work here? Why do you work here? Why do you work here? Which actually is a question in the story itself. He's created for himself a real reason. He says it's better for me to get blasted fake a million times than for. So it's almost like he's like become so cynical of like of people improving that he's like, fuck it, I'll do this. Or maybe he's deluding himself because I need a job, which he also mentions, which again, I guess points to the pressures of, selling out. We see tons of like whoever you want to talk about on Fox News that's Black or whatever, doing whatever, sellout thing they're doing. And again, maybe we're more likely to fully dismiss them, but there's a motivation for them that for them is real. And honoring that and knowing that, as opposed to thinking they're not just crazy people doing something dumb for no reason. There's an incentive for them that they have justified is necessary for their personal ascent in life, or maybe they really do believe it, or whatever's happened. That said, like that is for me as a writer, that's an interesting space to inhabit. This character who I don't agree with them, but I'm going to stay with them and see if they change a little. And that story, maybe he does. Maybe he's like, I was kind of wrong or whatever, but at least I need him to be in that space to start to get there. Because again, I also need a change over the course of a story, as opposed to, I agree with Nana, and at the end of the story, I still agree with Nana, because that means the reader was going to be like, okay, great. We all agree with each other.
Pack it up, go home.
We fixed it. That was easy. You know what I'm saying?
How do you know when a story is done? Sorry, I should be clear. How do you know when the story has reached a culmination, not when it is ready for publication?
I feel like it depends, but like oftentimes, like when I know, like I can't, there's nothing I can do to make the tension higher. Like I've exhausted all means of like possible tension points. Like the explosion has already happened, And of course, sometimes like you play around with that, you'll gesture towards like crazy explosion and like pull back. And that's another, you could like have some fun with it. But to me, like that culmination space is like, yeah, like this is this. And then the powder keg blew up. And again, every story is a whole new, it's like, to me, it's like a whole new world or something, a whole new element. So I can't use the answer is different for every single story, but that's the closest approximation to something I could think about that would be true across several different stories. When I feel like I've just wrung the tension that is to be wrung out, like the same thing I was talking about before. Okay, so in that case, it's like I've gotten the guy who works in Zimmerland just as I pushed him to like what I know he'll really honestly, in my opinion, feels unacceptable. So then what does he do in that moment? Then that feels important to me. Like that feels like a place to maybe leave, and that will be true of hopefully several different aspects in the story, and they'll all sort of meet at a place that feels meaningful.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I said, too many things I want to ask. We're like halfway through our time. Okay, so I'm going to pivot to my question about genre. So one of the things that really struck me as I was reading through this is that I couldn't quite think of something else like it. There's a lot of pieces in the collection that are kind of speculative fiction-y, they're sci-fi, but not super, and so I'm curious where you draw, what genres and what traditions you feel like you're drawing on to put these stories together.
I really appreciate you saying that, because to me, like, I feel like if I could have written like a list of like 5 things I really hope for myself as an artist, like that would be one of them. Like for people to be like, this is like not like anything else.
Yeah.
Like I strive for that.
I think you've accomplished it, honestly. Like I told like 3 different people in my life, across very different walks of life. I'm like, I have this collection I think you should read. I don't quite know how to describe it. You just got to trust me on this one.
Even me, I have trouble describing it. And I have like a little elevator pitch because like you're forced to when you go on tour or whatever. But like, I think that real art stuff should be hard. I mean, how would you describe? I mean, I can't think of any like painting that would make me not sound like annoying, but like a really great painting is hard to describe. You kind of have to experience it, you know, and not, or not even a great painting, but a painting in general. Like you have to experience it. I could give you a little blurb about it, but that is so far from what it truly is. And to me, what that just means, you have a style that is really realized. So that's why I really appreciate that. But I think the reason why though is it has a lot to do with where I'm from. I'm from Spring Valley, Rockland County. I was born in Queens, New York, but I'm from Spring Valley, which is a place that isn't often represented in like anything ever or never. But we're also very near New York City. So, and like I went to like my school, I come from a place of like all different types of immigrants. And we were all like minorities together. Like we had probably 4 or 5 white people in my graduating class. And so that like, I guess I was used to like a mix of a lot of different things from the beginning. And I was born in Queens. So like I said, like, which is obviously like the most diverse place like probably ever in the world, I think. I was used to like a lot of different things being together off rip, number one. Then in terms of my person, I used to feel really like when I was in college, like, or like pre-college, I was ashamed or something that I didn't go to like, you know, the schools, you know what I'm saying?
Exeter or something kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah, or, you know, then our college, then go to whatever. Like in high school, I always wanted to go to my high school, but like, you know, you want to go to Columbia, Harvard or whatever. My older sister went to Columbia, and you know how that goes. But I went to a place called SUNY Albany, which no one cared about. And again, like it was way late in my process of reading that I started reading quote unquote literary work. So I took very seriously my little, I'm from the, you know, I'm 30, I'm from the like OG Harry Potter generation, but I also read a bunch of like random serial sci-fi or fantasy stuff. I'm huge on manga and anime, which is important because I feel like I was taught very early on that like you can use violence and fighting with a deep philosophical like justification in the background. People joke about in Dragon Ball Z how like Goku will talk for like an hour before the fight starts, but that's because like he wants to really, really like explain this is exactly why I have to kill you now. I really wouldn't do it otherwise. He's talking to someone who already blew up like 8 planets. He's like, I do not want to do this, but I've been forced to, which is an important difference compared to American shit where it's like, shoot 1 million nameless guys on your way to the guy just because or whatever. And and I guess for me, it's really hard to poke at it, like choose a specific thing. But I think manga and the fantasy stuff I read growing up and anime and, you know, magic, feeling like magic was just in everything and it felt cool. And probably the music I listen to, I'm a big fan of rap and I like I try to make music stuff. I'm sure all of it has been a part of it. And then like taking all of that I already had, and then like in college or something, being introduced to like literary work, it was like I felt like I had a lot of stuff I didn't want to abandon that ended up being still a part of what I do now, and whatever people call is what they're going to call it. But I don't, because I didn't work thinking, I didn't read and I don't now write thinking about a genre that I inhabit.
Did you?
That was a long answer.
No. This is super interesting.
I hope that I wonder how the interpreters are just like interpreting like this Dragon Ball Z and whatnot. Thank you guys. You guys are amazing.
Yes, doing the Lord's work. Thank you so much. I'm also, because I'm asking questions that are a little bit off script, but I'm curious. So
no, they're perfect.
Did you always want to be a writer? You know, like kind of what I hear in this is that you came to like literary production relatively late in your life, and I'm curious if that was about desire, about exposure, like
exposure for sure. I didn't know, like I genuinely genuinely probably didn't believe until I got to college that like a person could be a writer, if that makes sense. Like I didn't know it was a real thing. If that, I just didn't understand. I used to live in the library as a kid pretty much. And I didn't understand that each of those books was written by a human being, excuse me, or a collection of human beings that are not given enough credit. If you're someone like, what's his name? Patterson or whatever.
Yeah.
No offense to him, I guess. Like, go ahead, dude. I guess you're a writer still. But yeah, I think I didn't understand that I was I was allowed, like you could just do it. That said, I was writing way before that. Writing for me was like a lot of people have the escapism thing. I'm part of that group. It was something for me to do that no one could take away from me. Like like in that story of things my mother said, like that's like sort of true. And we've had the whole thing where like, okay, now you can't live in that house anymore. And then you live in this apartment and then now you're evicted. And so now you're living in the worst apartment. And I guess that helped me. It made me realize that a lot of the things I loved could be taken away. And I guess I sort of, in this weird trauma bond, resented those things, but really became attached to writing because it was free and you couldn't take it away from me. So I started writing. I was writing stories at probably 13, 14, but I just didn't think of myself or any person as a writer.
Now that you think of yourself as a writer, and now that you are a professional writer, what do
I?
you?
Who knows?
Well, I'm assuming. Do you think of yourself now as a writer?
I'm forced to, but like I'm getting a lot better at like, as you like will see, like you've probably seen, like when people like give me like praise or whatever, I'll try to find a way to like joke it away or like hide from it. I'm getting a lot better, if you can believe that. I like sitting in it, especially like during the introductions and stuff like that. It feels very awkward and weird for me. But I guess I logically know, no, like some part of me always knew, even before I allowed it to be a thing, you know, in my own like thinking mind. But I'm slowly letting that part grow. So sometimes, but for the most part, it's getting better because I'm really trying. I'm making an effort to be like, this is your life now.
It's funny you say that. I was attending a lecture a couple of weeks ago, and the woman who was presenting was asked a question, and she's like, well, I'm not the expert on this. And then she paused. It was like, well, I guess technically I am the expert. That's why you're all sitting here in this audience.
Yeah, it's a weird deal. And like, again, I not to make it like there is like, you almost have to have like a disassociation thing because like, again, I'm from Spring Valley, Rockland County. Like I know like the idea that I'm speaking now and it's being translated in French and people presumably in Paris.
Yes, several people
might care to listen to this. It is let's just call it like it's almost too much to really like comprehend. I'm so grateful for it, but it's like kind of like, damn, like, you know what I mean? Like it's a lot
like staring
to me.
At the sun. You can't really do it for a long time.
Yeah. So I, make stupid jokes and hope that people like, feel like they didn't like waste their time.
Well, I don't know about the other participants in this, but I'm very glad for your participation today. We're running a little bit short on time, so we've got about 10 minutes left. So I have a question about, so unlike some of the other books that are featured in this series put on by the American Library in Paris, this collection came out in 2018. And so I'm curious about how this has aged, right? So it's prior to George Floyd, it's prior to Ahmaud Arbery, and so I'm
Wildly,
curious,
right?
Yeah, what has surprised you about its reception and the work that it does in the world over the last 3 years?
It's nuts. Like, so it keeps gaining life through translations, which is incredible, super incredible. Like, translations are popping up now. Like this French edition came out relatively recently, for example.
Got it.
And so there's something that happened that's like sort of difficult actually. And like, I don't know how to like mitigate it or manage it. Like Ahmaud Arbery is murdered, right? And then it's almost like, I almost wrote a story about this called like Black Death Correspondent or something. Like I'll get a call from like Germany and they'll be like, do you want to talk about this? And it's like, no. But then it's like, then I feel as though like, maybe I should. or something because I have something to say about it. But do I want to? No, I want to crawl up in a ball somewhere and be sad. So the book has grown in many ways. And it's really funny to think about it because this book is obviously about more than Black people being murdered, but because the first story is what it is. And I knew this, but I guess I didn't know the back end of it. Like the same thing I said, like the reason why I put that story first, because if they throw my book in the garbage and never think about me again, at least I got them that way. The other side of that is there's some people who will read just that story and think about it only and see me as, you know, correspondent for Black death. And it's weird to, I have one of my writer friends, Rion Almacar Scott, said like, you almost start to feel like a war profiteer because this doesn't stop, meaning like Black people are being mistreated everywhere all the time forever. And for some people, it becomes like, oh, wait, that reminds me of this book. And I'm being weird about my own book, but like, you know, it's like a weird, it's weird.
Yeah,
so
no, absolutely.
That's one thing about it. But outside of that, it's been also extremely beautiful. Like I had people from Japan telling me they rock with the book, and that's like, it's a dream come true. And in some ways, it's like this little book, like it won't die in some ways, you know, like like you said, it was October 2018. My life, it's 2021 right now. And I'm speaking to you. I have the great pleasure of speaking to you right now. So it's like, it's really just been growing in this really incredible way. And I feel grateful for all of it. But it's you know, it's been a growing process, a growing feeling process. And I'm very grateful for all of it, even though it has some challenges. Absolutely.
I think now there's a number of very good questions in the chat. And so now I think might be a good time for me to pass it over to Alice, who will do a little bit of moderating herself.
Kierstan, thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you for this collection. I
really appreciate it.
It is a laugh that is all teeth. I loved it.
Kierstan, thank you so much.
That's a good description.
You're welcome to take it.
I gotta like write that down.
Thank you. Kierstan, thank you. And as Nana kept saying, you know, smart question after smart question. Someone wrote in the chat.
Right?
I know. And I wrote in the chat, you know, please post your questions here. And someone said, Kierstan's asking all the questions I want to ask.
Yeah, like those are the good ones.
Questions. I just want to, I have posted the links to how to buy your book in French and English, but I also want to post and highlight Kierstan's interview and review of Claudia Rankine's book, Just Us, which is how I discovered.
Yeah, I need that.
And she is a brilliant interviewer and writer, and so please check out her work as well.
Please.
Yeah. So I just wanted to also say, if you've stumbled into this conversation a bit late, you have stumbled into the final conversation of Lettres d'Amérique, a series organized by the American Library Paris, the US Embassy, Transfuge Magazine, and Festival America. We are listening to Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah talk about his collection of short stories, Friday Black, and I have received so many fantastic questions, as Kierstan had said in the chat. I'm going to get to them. First, I just want to highlight the international character of our audience. We have people tuning in from Paris, Dijon, New Haven, Connecticut.
That's
the Lac, I don't know where this is, Lac de la Tuile in Savoy, more Paris, Montpellier, Paris, and yeah.
I gotta go to Paris, man.
You gotta come to Paris. You both have to come to Paris.
I know. Invite us again next year or wherever the place is.
Totally. I want to start with Indiana's question. So Indiana writes, first and foremost, I want to thank you for everything you've written. I'm very grateful. I'm currently working on a doctoral dissertation on the use of monstrosity in American and South African works that can be labeled as Afro-futurist, and my corpus includes Friday Black.
Wow, geez,
which is
an honor. Thank you.
Quite cool. And so Indiana wants to know, could you elaborate on the way your stories echo each other in the collection? Would you say there is an evolution in Friday Black? And could you almost read Zimmerland like the sequel to Finkelstein 5? Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great question. And like, to me, the idea when you're putting a collection together is that really the story should all echo off each other to create a new and new whole. Somebody said, if you have like a book of poems and there's 99 poems, the order is the 100th poem. I really feel the same way about like a story collection, that, you know, the order and the way at which they arrive together in this in a bound thing is really important. And so I don't think of Finkelstein 5 and Zimmerland as like, you know, one sequential like sort of sequel, but they definitely like sort of spiritual like other approaches. You know, if you have Emmanuel, who's sort of gone into like the pure resistance, anger, you have Isaiah and Zimmerland, who's maybe become sort of complicit in this own way of, again, trying to, if not resist, mitigate something, you know. But really what's happening is like this oppressive space, their world, because of their bodies they inhabit, has shaped the ways in which they're able to not only define themselves, but live at all. And so, you know, in that way, they feel like really connected. And I mean, there is it's funny, like working on like the ideas of potential adaptation for screen, there actually was going to be like an actual connection between them too. So, you know, I think you're right on the money in terms of seeing them is like, you know, having sort of this sort of spiritual succession. I don't necessarily think of them as like this happened and this happened, but they definitely have like that connective tissue that exists between them more explicitly than I think they are with other stories. But again, I feel that most of the stories should have some kind of echo off each other and most kind of energy that makes you feel as though they exist in the same sort of like, I don't know, spiritual space, if that makes sense and isn't too dumb.
Makes sense and is not at all too dumb. Well, of course, this response and the question turns on the point that you are a short story writer. And so much of the kind of discussion tonight has been about the form of the short story. And so Michael wants to know, and I also want to know.
What's going on, Michael?
I know Michael. This is a kind of very to the point question. Sticking with short stories for future work or something longer?
I got a novel on the oven right now.
Can you say what? Yeah. Why is the novel?
You know, I'm very, 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 very big about like not feeling as though one is better or more intense or whatever than the other. But it just so happened that I had a story that I couldn't tell in a short story form. I tried, and now it's a novel, and I'm working on it. I mean, I can give you more, but I can give you more meaningfully pretty soon. I have a draft and I'm in revision mode, but it's like, you know, I'm way closer to done than starting, if that says anything.
What about the story made it impossible to write it as a short story?
I knew I was going to have I knew that to get at its highest level, I knew that the issue I was trying to like address had so many heads. I knew that I wanted to speak to so many different like heads of this like hydra, and it would also require me to use a lot of different voices. And so I just didn't feel that was possible in a short story. I couldn't do in a short story, but I would have if I could have, for sure.
Okay, more questions. Fred, who's tuning from Paris, would like to know, do you see the entire plot of a story before you start writing it? Put another way, does a story ever have plot twists that you discover only in the writing? All of them, all plot twists I discover in the writing, for me, all. I don't, especially for my stories, I don't outline. And even in my novel, I kind of outline, but it's just to get you to the end. And then you take these like twists that you thought you were going to keep towards the end, and you move them to the beginning. That's what I do almost all the time, because I think the reader can tell when I'm holding something behind my back, but you can't see it. I think the writer's like, you're holding something behind your back, bro. I see it. So I have to arrive at the surprise genuinely for them to arrive at the surprise genuinely, in my opinion. I don't know how like detective novelists do it, because they presumably have to work backwards. And I think that's such an artful thing they're doing, but I can't do that. I have to write towards discovery for there to be like a real feeling, genuine sense of discovery. At least for me, I don't believe it if I'm like, have this like end, that's shocking end that I'm withholding for like 200 pages. No, I can't do it. Or even 10 pages, it just doesn't feel true to me. It's a really good question though. I want to encourage other people to post great questions. We've we've moved through them quickly. Now I have questions of my own to add. You mentioned two of your mentors in this conversation, Arthur Fires and George Saunders, and what they've taught you. I wonder if you could speak more about your mentors, to use that word, what you would agree, and what have they taught you along the way?
And I'd be remiss not to mention Dana Spiotta, who actually gave me the first person to give me novel feedback, and it happened yesterday. I was terrified. I was like panicking. So Dana, Arthur, George have all been, and there's other people as well, Lynn Tillman in Albany, Schwarzschild in Albany. There's been a ton of people who have been super instrumental to my development as a writer. They've helped me in so many ways. Number one was just seeing me as someone worthy of this thing I wanted to do. They took me seriously from the beginning. Cause like, even though again, underneath like sort of jokey and kind of stupid, like outer, presenting like public facing person, I'm like super serious about the writing stuff. Like very obsessive, unhealthily so probably. And to like be seen by them was like a certain kind of affirmation that I really needed. George was my favorite writer. That's why I went to Syracuse, to have my, so to have that sort of like person look at you as almost like a peer was like different. It changes the way I thought of myself. Then they've just handled my work with great care. Kierstan mentioned the one story where she didn't particularly like the protagonist, and how I eventually didn't either. And that happened through workshop with Dana and getting to see like, oh, like you're kind of being problematic, which is the better way of saying it. Or this person is problematic. And Dana helped me see that with great love and care. Arthur was the first one to like take one of my drafts and like really like be like eviscerated. It was my first like really bad workshop. And I needed that because I was like faking. I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. It felt false. And I think you could tell that. George.
He's the one who said writing costs you something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes. And and he's really like helped me in so many ways. George taught me how to be a better reader, which is the most important skill a writer has, and helped me like break down my stories and put them back together and really understand their parts. He also told me, it sounds very basic, but he says, be simple, be precise. And, I remember writing those words like everywhere, be simple, be precise. And he like will give you an example of that by, like line editing. He's like really good line editor. And I don't really like, let everybody line edit me, So like, he's like, I really know that he's paying all the necessary attention. And he also understands like the soul of it. That's the thing. Dana, Arthur, George, and all my professors that I really like rock with, they all understand like the soul of the stuff we're trying to get to. And, like I said, I just recently sent George a story, and they're still in my life. I still look up to them. And, I feel very, very, very grateful for that.
That's lovely. Do you feel that you've become a mentor to young emerging writers?
I mean, I know I have. I taught for a while, so it's almost unavoidable. But also, yeah, I still talk to my students from years before. I'm still rooting for them. I'm still writing recommendations, but more importantly, I'm trying to make them feel like they can do whatever they want to do. And I'm really, really proud of a lot of them. I was in Syracuse the other day, and one of my sort of kind of mentees, even though I'd like to tell him, like, you did everything on your own, like, has this like created this program in Syracuse, and he's like freaking flourishing. And I'm so proud of him. And if I've been a small part of that, it's so cool for me. And I've got students who are cold. I don't know if that will translate. Like by cold, I mean like good, like really good at writing. Like they're like, it's over for some people when they drop. Like I'm like, they're gonna shake up the world in a lot of ways. So I do have some mentees, and I am their biggest cheerleader, or I try to be.
I love that. They're so cold. The interpreters are like, what?
Yeah, I was like, let me like.
It's good. Okay.
I think if I said hot, it would have made sense, but I was like,
yeah,
that's not how I would have said it. So I had to like, I didn't,
Yeah.
I got you guys.
I was curious, you had said, Kierstan had kind of commented on how these stories, there's no genre, there's no kind of discernible genre, and you had said that this is kind of one of the 5 things I had hoped for, that people had said this is not like anything else. Maybe that was kind of 5 as a kind of in the moment number.
Hey, you're gonna ask me to say the other 4?
Well, just some. I mean, it doesn't have to be 4, it could be 2.
So yeah, because what I was breaking that down to is like, 1, I want people to see that I have a style that's my own, which is how I was interpreting Kierstan's comment. A style of my own, and like it's identifiable, which is what I feel like is the equivalent of like, if you haven't read anything like this, you have to describe it by saying it's itself. A voice, yeah, like a real voice.
There we say, a voice.
Yeah, being comfortable with like my own voice, like having a voice that's discernible. That matters a lot to me. I want to feel as though my writing made someone think about something differently that they maybe haven't thought of before. I want people to read my stuff and feel like they enjoyed it, which might be number 1. It was like engaging and entertaining. I want to help people who might feel, I hope to make someone feel a little less alone. And yeah, I hope that, I mean, that's 4. I feel like I know there's another one, but I don't know how to word it. I hope that, yeah, a little less alone is connected to like, I hope they feel loved a little, or I hope that their imagination is stretched. Maybe I'll say that as a 5th one. I hope that which is another, is connected to the think about things they never thought of it. But I hope that they, as a result of some of the other things I've said, their imagination and like their willingness to think that of what is possible has expanded, even if just a little bit.
Thank you for having 5.
That was a good freestyle, right? That was a freestyle. Boom. I mean it though.
Tomorrow in Lit Hub, Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah 5 top tips.
I know. I hope they don't do that. I hope they ask me first again, because like I don't know. Like, anyways.
I've just received a question from Connie, who is a loyal follower of literary events this season.
Hey, Connie.
Connie wants to know, as a person from the US, it is incredible that you have managed the balance of emotions and told a story that compels people to read about the events and the core issues that are very polarizing in the US. How do you control your personal emotional attachment while creating these enormously compelling stories?
It's really important, because like the story that I was talking about before that George said, like, oh, the reader and the character and the world are all on the same side. It had to do with guns, and I have a certain feeling about like the craziness of American gun space. But to me, the way, I guess, to answer question, so that's my personal feeling. But to make a compelling, interesting story, I have to like go of that a little bit, or also just grow myself a little bit and be like, despite how I feel about the gun stuff, that person over there this is just an example I'm giving to answer your question, Connie. That person over there truly believes that it is their like God-given right to have this AK-47 or whatever. And there's something going on that I have to like respect it, even as ridiculous as it might be. Like, I have to like be willing to do the work of respecting them enough or to create a character that I myself can love. Because I try to make sure that I have to find, if I can love all my characters, and almost all my characters, and then go from there. Because if not, it's just an exercise in my own ego, really. Look how smart I am. Look how like right my views are. Even if I'm gonna arrive back at like, what, I do feel like I'm right about this, I'm gonna have gone through the way of which I've genuinely honored people that oppose me. Because again, I don't think it's this or that anyways. I don't, it's like, it's gonna be, it's a million different things. Every person has their own reasons, but there's something genuine motivating them. And I know there's something genuine motivating me. And if I can give them the grace to believe that their reasoning, at least for them, is as real as mine, then I can get to a realer place in the fiction. I hope that makes sense.
That's such an amazing answer. And I was just thinking as you were saying it, it seems to me that so many people aren't making that step.
Oh, it's very cool to be like,
especially online. Huh?
You know what I mean? Like, of course, like
Mm.
I could just say like, I mean, I don't want to give an example because literally I'm afraid of what people will say. You know, like that's how crazy it is. But yeah, of course, these bad things are bad. We're basically saying bad things are bad over and over again. But it's like, but that person thinks it's great. That person loves that thing. That person is, yeah, they could be ignorant, yeah, they whatever, but for them. But because unless we're gonna just erase them from the planet, we have to find a way of getting there. Because I don't want to sing to the choir forever. You know, I know some people agree with me, or I know some people feel the world as I do, but I also know I disagree with a lot of people. And I also and it's also like this idea of us I'm saying us, like meaning I guess generally liberal people, but we should know by now that there's a lot of inconsistencies among us as well. So that illusion that that's not the case is silly.